We at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or called USCIRF, have again recommended that the State Department designate Syria as a country of particular concern because of its ongoing systematic and egregious violations of religious freedom. As many of you know, USCIRF is a bipartisan independent government agency with a mandate to assess religious freedom conditions abroad and make recommendations to the President, the Secretary of State, and to Congress. With all the different players on the ground and the complicated factors in Syria, we have seen many policymakers and officials in the US, as well as internationally, look away, just presuming it is too complicated to figure a way forward. Actually, if you look at the conditions on the ground in each of the distinct areas in the regime, Turkey, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, and under the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, the way forward becomes actually more clear. If we are serious about preserving Christianity in Syria, we must acknowledge the actual realities on the ground for this ancient community, and then we need a roadmap for a way forward. I'm thankful for the work of In Defense of Christians for hosting this important discussion and also for letting me be a part. So there used to be 1.5 million Christians in Syria, but now some have reported that it has dropped from 10% down to 3.5% or even lower to under 700,000. I'm going to briefly share some information that USCIRF has documented in each of the areas in Syria, but spend most of my time talking about Northeast Syria, since I've just returned from my second trip there in the last 6 months, having spent over 6 weeks on the ground there. In addition, less is known about this promising area for Christians and other religious and ethnic minorities. Our USCIRF 2021 annual report that was just released in April shows that in regime areas, the Syrian government continues to brutalize communities and individuals that it perceived as supporting or tolerating any opposition. The government continued to solidify its hold on all aspects of political, economic, and religious life. And President Assad persisted in framing his rule in Islamic terms. Assad continues to incorrectly present himself as a sole defender of Christians, of course, in exchange for their quiescence and support. In the Idlib province, radical Islamist al-Qaeda affiliate Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, that is vying with other local factions for control, was designated by the US State Department as an entity of particular concern for its severe violations of religious freedom. The State Department and numerous independent sources have reported that HTS has been targeting Christians and others with killings, kidnapping, physical mistreatment, and detentions. Multiple media reports have indicated that different Islamic factions are subjecting Christians to Sharia law and even a jizya tax, pressuring them to leave their homes. For this reason, USCIRF has recommended targeted sanctions against leaders of HTS and other militias committing these crimes. In the area that Turkey has invaded and occupied, such as Afrin, where Turkey invaded in 2018, and in areas around Tel Abyab and Serikani, where Turkey invaded in October of 2019, we continue to see horrific atrocities against Christians, Yazidis, Kurds, and other religious and ethnic minorities that one would have expected under the ISIS caliphate, not a NATO ally. Turkey directly supports and commands radical Islamist factions of the Free Syrian Army, or the Syrian National Army, such as Falak al-Sham and the Sultan Murad Brigade. And we see killings, kidnapping, forced conversions, destruction of religious sites, and other war crimes. USCIRF is not alone in our reporting, as the State Department just released its annual report on religious freedom, and its chapter on Syria is quite damning for Turkey. In August, a Turkish-backed Free Syrian Army court in Afrin arrested Radwan Muhammad for having a Christian funeral for his wife. They had both converted to Christianity decades ago. They ended up charging him with apostasy for his beliefs. And in September, the UN International Commission of Inquiry released a report about the areas Turkey occupies in Syria that again documented these troubling conditions. Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, Genocide Watch have all independently documented them as well. There is now no disagreement. Turkey and its Islamist militias are committing war crimes with impunity in Syria against Christians, Yazidis, Kurds, and others. The US government and the international community can no longer look away, especially if there is any concern for religious and ethnic minorities. USCIRF has recommended that the US government exert pressure on and engage with Turkey to provide a timeline for its withdrawal from Northeast Syria. In the interim, the US should demand that it order armed factions under its control or influence to cease all activity negatively impacting religious and ethnic minorities in the area. We also recommend targeted sanctions against leaders of the Turkish-backed Free Syrian Army and other groups involved in these crimes. Meanwhile, and in previous years and in previous reports we have had, and in stark contrast to other parts of Syria and even in the region, Northeast Syria remains a uniquely promising area for religious freedom. Christians, Yazidis, Muslims, and others are allowed to practice their faith openly and even convert to another religion, something unheard of in the rest of the region. Christians in Northeast Syria can be viewed by ethnic groups or religious groups. So ethnically, you have Syriac, Assyrian, Chaldean Christians, and Armenian Christians. From a religious standpoint, you have Orthodox, which can be Syriac or Armenian, Catholic, which could be Chaldean, Syriac, or Armenian, and Protestant, with Syriac, Armenian, and also Kurdish converts, and the Assyrian Church of the East. Christians have continued to leave Northeast Syria in recent years, just like the rest of Syria, because they have feared for their safety due to the authoritarian Assad regime, the civil war, and then of course, because of ISIS. While some have estimated approximately 100,000 are left in the region, others have suggested that the actual amount of Christians is far less. During my visits, I have appreciated the opportunity to meet with a wide range of Christians, including religious leaders, civil society leaders, women's organizations, militia leaders, and political leaders. For instance, the vice co-chair of the Autonomous Administration of Northeast Syria is Elizabeth Curry, a Syriac Christian. The co-chair of the Legislative Council is also a Syriac Christian. I've also met with several Armenian Christians, including one who is the co-chair of the Euphrates Regional Government. I have even met with Kurdish converts to Christianity in Kobani. I visited one church that has been in existence for a few years and another that is opening soon. I was able to visit the Church of the Martyrs in the center of the city of Raqqa, an Armenian church that the government is working with private organizations to rebuild. I was able to spend time with the co-chairs of the Raqqa regional government, Laila Mustafa and Hassan Mustafa, and they shared that most of the Christians in Raqqa now are from Tel Abyad and other areas that were forced to flee when Turkey invaded. So most of the Christians that were here before ISIS have still not returned, as their houses are still destroyed. Unfortunately, over 40,000 houses were destroyed in Raqqa alone by the US-led coalition to defeat Daesh in the fight against ISIS. Then President Trump froze stabilization funds that had already been appropriated to help Raqqa and other areas decimated by the fight against ISIS recover. As normally, the US rebuilds what they destroy. Fortunately, stabilization funds were freed up earlier this year, and I understand more are on their way. I was also encouraged to hear that the new Deputy Envoy for Syria, David Brownstein, recently came to Raqqa and met with the leadership, something that had not happened in previous administrations. Co-chair Laila Mustafa said to me privately in April, "We hope Christians can return to Raqqa and be part of the mosaic of people here." It is clear that the Northeast is the one area of Syria where Christians are able to practice their faith freely, as all religious communities are. I've continued to be encouraged by the development of the government. It is structurally set up to include all religions and ethnicities in each level of government, and half of the leaders are women. This encourages a culture of tolerance that has expanded to the Arab areas as well, like Manbij, Tabqa, and Raqqa. Most have heard the now legendary stories of how the Syrian Democratic Forces defeated the ISIS Caliphate as our partners on the ground with the US-led coalition to defeat Daesh, losing over 11,000 lives, so the US did not have to put boots on the ground. But most still don't understand that after liberating an area from ISIS, they would set up self-governance that has become the Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria. The last battle against ISIS, the Battle of Baghouz, was won just 2 years ago, February. It is astounding to think that Raqqa was the headquarters of the ISIS Caliphate just 3.5 years ago, and is now the headquarters of this government that has among the best religious freedom and gender equality conditions in the region. But this is still a very young government. What most policymakers and officials miss is that when they set up a way to hold the ground, we helped to win during this war. So we won't have to come back and fight this war again. And this is how we stop a forever war, with governance. And this is how we ensure that Christians, Yazidis, and other religious minorities can stay and build a future. In Syria and elsewhere, the US spends heavily on military side and diplomacy side, but somehow misses the one way forward for true stability after a military success, and that is governance. The key is not choosing the right person, which seems to be the US preference. Instead, there needs to be governance that is built with the grassroots, with all the components represented. This is how the Autonomous Administration has built this bottoms-up government. The last administration refused to interact directly with the Autonomous Administration, yet the Autonomous Administration is the very key to stopping a forever war and protecting Christians and other religious minorities. At USCIRF, we are pleased that the US government is now following our recommendation from last April to expand engagement with the Autonomous Administration. So Turkey continues to claim that the Autonomous Administration and the Syrian Democratic Forces are connected to the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, and are a danger on its borders. Amy Austin-Holmes has just released an important paper using independent data that will address this. You will enjoy her presentation in a few minutes. But I do want to talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to talking about Northeast Syria, and that is the PKK. Turkey's accusations that the people of Northeast Syria are terrorists and are building a government that the PKK can use to fight Turkey is ridiculous. They are building a future for their people. If the US government has a concern that the PKK has influence in the autonomous administration or the Syrian Democratic Forces, they should audit the government, send a team to see for themselves, and negotiate this directly with them. I've never suggested unconditional support for the autonomous administration. The conditions are what warrant US support for this important but fragile government. Now, after hearing all of this, one could ask if conditions are now so positive in Northeast Syria, then why are Christians still leaving, or why are they not returning in larger numbers? Well, first, the overwhelming apprehension I heard from Christians about staying in Northeast Syria was the potential of the Assad regime returning. Because of the deal Assad has with Christians, there is fear he would be particularly harsh on them for living under the autonomous administration. It is hard to overstate how pervasive this is throughout the region. Christians are also afraid of violence from ISIS cells that remain and from another Turkish invasion. While visiting the Raqqa Stadium, I was overwhelmed by the scale of imprisonment, torture, and execution. The remembrance of these horrors is everywhere in the area ISIS used to rule. The stories of similar atrocities in the areas Turkey has invaded and occupies just reminds Christians how they have too often been the target of these Islamist factions. And Turkey continues to break their ceasefire, shelling civilian areas around Ain Issa and Tel Tamar. Another reason is the hopelessness Christians felt because of the perceived betrayal after the US announced the withdrawal of troops and allowed Turkey to invade. Every day while I was in Northeast Syria, someone would ask me why the US turned its back on them and allowed an invasion. This was especially hard coming from people who had lost loved ones. In the last invasion alone, over 70,000 people are still displaced from these invasions. Many lost everything they had, their homes, their land, their savings, their livelihood. And lastly, Christians are struggling economically in Northeast Syria, along with most other communities. While the US has continued to add sanctions in order to cripple the Assad regime, these actions have continued to hurt the people of Northeast Syria as well. That is why USCIRF has recommended that the US lift sanctions on just the area governed by the autonomous administration. The US punishes governments all the time with sanctions, so it makes sense for them to reward one for their excellent conditions. And since Northeast Syria has 80% of the oil in Syria and some of the most fertile land in the Middle East, they can build a future for their people if given the chance. The situation in Syria for Christians is far more complex than I have time to explore today, including how they are currently reclaiming land they left while fleeing ISIS. It is encouraging that the autonomous administration has set up a committee to help Christians navigate that process. The key is that there is government here that wants Christians to stay and to return, but they need international recognition and support to be able to survive. For that reason, USCIRF has recommended that the US government give political recognition to the autonomous administration as a local legitimate government. In addition, USCIRF also recommends that the US demand the autonomous administration's inclusion in all activities pursuant to UN Resolution 2254, including Geneva-based talks to resolve the Syrian conflict. Instead of waiting for Assad to step aside and then deciding the way forward for Syria, the US and the international community should instead support what is already working, which is the autonomous administration of North and East Syria. The future of Christianity in Syria likely depends upon it. Thank you so much.